Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's screening of Vikalp Bengaluru. Thank you, BIC, for hosting us and bringing your very eclectic, appealing programming into our homes. Our filmmakers for today, Amit Mohanty and Ruchika Negi, are two filmmakers whose work I have always enjoyed and found to be deeply thought-provoking, aesthetic, and engaging at many levels. And Two Autumns in Vishogrod is no different. In fact, with this film, I felt transported to this small European town and as invested in the issues and concerns as the residents and students of the town. Thank you, Amit and Ruchika, for screening your film and joining us today.
Thank you, Sandhya. Thank you, Vikalp. Thank you, BIC, for inviting us and for showing the work.
The first question I have takes us to the very beginning of your project. And that's of interest to me because unlike several other documentary films where we start with a topic or a question, here the film presented in a seamless manner is actually born out of an art residency that you got in Warsaw. So what persuaded you to instead to step out of Warsaw and focus on Visegrad and River Vistula?
Yeah, okay, right. Like you pointed out, this is part of a residency which we did at the Center for Contemporary Art in Warsaw. The residency was spread over 2 years, 3 months in 2016 and 3 months in 2017. Before we actually went for the residency, I mean, we had actually kind of started reading up around, well, we were interested in the idea of the river. I mean, like many of you may have seen in the film, the river is actually quite central to the narrative of the film. And we have generally been interested in ecological and social ecologies around this river, I mean, in general. And that's one of our interest areas of work. So we had started reading around the Vistula River, looking at it from a historical perspective, from an ecological perspective, from a social perspective, how it was kind of spoken about in the news, etc. And actually, we then kind of stumbled upon this idea, upon an article, about this plain, which had just been kind of excavated the year before we went there. And it had kind of, caused a bit of consternation in that town, So this kind of became an interesting starting point for us, to kind of see, something which has kind of been submerged in the river for so long, kind of gets unearthed in this small little town, already a kind of a micro kind of an ecology in itself. What kind of happens, 1 year later, what would be the kind of dynamic that would present itself? So actually that was what kind of led us to this place, Visegrad in particular.
And you knew you were going to go back the next year?
When we went at the beginning of the first round, we didn't know that. After we went to the first time, then we knew that, okay, that this would be carry on to the second one.
So you went the very first time in 2016 when you kind of chanced upon this river and the town and the plane, the Soviet plane. And I'll come back to the plane. But then in 2017, when you go back, is when you said you decided to come up with the idea of using the school students for a workshop. And this I find a very, very interesting intervention that has been specifically made by the filmmakers and the directors. And Ruchika, also given your background in teaching and pedagogy, what led you to decide, or what persuaded you to decide to bring school students and their perspective on history?
So actually, I mean, the whole, in a way, I would say the entire film, the research and the shooting has been, in a sense, very organic in this work. Essentially, the second time when we went back, I mean, like Amit said, we didn't have an idea that this would extend, the residency would extend into another year. It's just that at the end of 2016, we found ourselves with a lot of material, with a lot of questions, and a kind of a very tentative sort of an acquaintance with the school in Visegrad, because Visegrad is a very small town. And in our interviews and in our conversations with people, we had met the history teacher, Grzegorz, whom you also see in the film. And there was something like you and I, like we were talking the other day, there is something about Grzegorz and the way he approached history, the idea of history to his students, which to us was very fascinating, and more than fascinating, I think it was very important, because there was an attitude of openness that he sort of brought on to the table, something, and particularly given how we are today all over the world, it was a kind of an attitude which was actually very inspirational in many ways, right? And one could connect to it very directly. So in a sense, when we knew at the end of 2016 that we were going back, one of the things that was that seemed to kind of automatically jump out at us was the kids, right? And how do they look at the idea of history? That if for two outsiders like Amit and me, if the plane, in a sense, personifies what Bishoprod's past could have been like, the students who are living through that history, living through those memories as young people, what is their connection to all this, in a sense, right? Their lived experience. And in a way, this is where this whole idea of the workshop and the interaction with the children came from. And as you see in the film, we actually began by sharing our footage with them. And it was a very lovely interaction, because actually many of them were really not interested in the plane. They had other, for us, for instance, it was our instant piece of attraction, right, in the town. But for the children, they had so many other things. They'd seen an old house, they'd heard Jewish stories. They wanted to find out other things in a way, right? So I think, like I was saying, I don't know if you want to add, but in a sense, this is how it came about. It was very organic. It just came out of our, this whole idea of looking into this idea of what history could possibly mean today to us. It kind of lent itself to that, the engagement. So, yeah.
And also as a method, just as a working method in terms of sharing our, first round of edited footage with the young school students. It was kind of, we were also actually very curious. We're like, how would they kind of view this perspective which is being presented to them of their own town by an outsider, and to see what that dynamic can kind of throw up. So which then kind of, evolved into a more, the actual workshop situation, which then happened over a couple of weeks, which we kind of did with the.
So what I found interesting is, often we do similar workshops as part of the research for a film, but how you chose to film the working of the workshop. And in fact, it becomes pretty central to the way the question of viewing at history.
Yes.
So I found that really engaging because when the film starts, I think it's going to be about the river and this wreckage and finding it out, and you have archival footage. And then you see people responding and you see these young students responding. But I was completely taken by surprise when the subject then moves into their perception of Jews and the Jewish history. And so that was, again, it really forced me to think, because I kept thinking the film is going to be about Poland's relationship with the Soviet Union, with the erstwhile Soviet Union and ideas of nationalism. So is that also this Jewish history, is that something that just kept coming up with the interactions, or is that also something that you had decided would be part of the narrative of the film?
Well, not really. It was something that was present when we were doing the research. But again, it's interesting. For two reasons. One was, of course, we know a lot of maybe towns in Poland, other towns in Europe, which have this kind of overlapping history of different kind of ethnicities and nationalities. So Vyšehrad, for example, has a lot of German history of Germans being there, history of Jews being there, history of Poles being there, history of Russians kind of being there at some point in time. That was one. So this Jewish question was something that we were very, very keen to kind of explore, that particular history. But actually what became interesting through this collaboration with the school children, because frankly, the story that they have got about that old Jewish house was frankly a story that we as outside filmmakers there would have found it very, very difficult to get access to a story like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Our experience of the Jewish presence in the town is through the remnants of the tombstones in the cemetery, through what we see in the museum, through the conversations that we had, maybe with the museum director. But what that lived history of the Jews in a town like Vyšehrad, because frankly, there was nobody whom we could kind of speak to about that history directly, and also given language and things like that, So actually, the children then became the kind of, the whole soul of the Jewish story was actually kind of executed by the children, in that particular story that they shot. So no, it was not actually part of the original design of the film as such. It was actually starting with the plane and the river and more things like that. And the more as we experienced the town, all these little kind of sub narratives kept coming into the canvas. In which we kept. I don't know if you want to add.
No, I think what is also interesting is that as outsiders, one is also. And particularly you know this, Sandhya, because you're a filmmaker yourself within documentary. One is extremely careful of not misrepresenting something, right? So there are times that, so particularly with the Jewish question, which is a very complicated question in the Polish scenario, we also frankly didn't feel like one had enough when knowledge is not the word, but one had enough standing, or, you know, had enough mooring in a sense to delve into it in a particular way. So though we kept, and obviously the town at some point, as the film also states, had a huge amount of Jewish population, right? But we didn't know how to go about looking at this question, you know, apart from, like he said, looking at the idea of memorialization or memory, you know, or what lingers in a sense, what is the residue in a sense of that. But so that is why it's also interesting how this, for students, it was it was just there, it was a non-negotiable. If you talk of history, you have to talk about the Jewish population. And the way the gentleman who was being interviewed, the way he sort of talks about it in a way which, again, is kind of, you know, it's not just one, it's not just to say that, oh, we had great relationship with the Jews. It's a complicated sort of a narrative that he presents, where there's also like a sense that the Polish perhaps had grouses against the Jews, right? Because they were better off than the rest. I think those kind of narratives for us also became, I mean, I think, again, like Amit is saying, as a method, it's very interesting to see how, you know, two different perspectives emerge depending on who's asking or who's looking, you know, in a sense. So yeah, I've forgotten what your question was, but yeah.
No, I mean, I was talking about the students and the school, and I think what that did in the film is very much like what you're saying, that it was not an outsider going and looking. I mean, yeah, who are these two Indians who've come into, you know, Poland, a small town, and trying to make a film? But I don't feel that at all. I really feel I'm very much inside that town, like I said in the beginning. And so segueing from there, I think let's come back to talking about history. Many of us think of history, I mean, I think of history as something which is, right? It just is, and it's not objective, but yes, there is a certain history which cannot be erased and it cannot be rewritten. There can be many different histories. There can be subaltern histories, feminist histories, but there are all things, facts which happened. And when you have things where they say that, no, the Soviet plane, we should not have a memorial to the Soviet plane, or we should not have a museum for the Jews. So I was surprised to see those kind of reactions, but then I kind of figured what you were doing and you were kind of giving different examples. So nothing, that's just a comment on how that is. And what I really want to understand, so yeah, we talked a little bit about the history of Poland, about how it's so tumultuous, like it was part of different empires till early 19th century. It became an independent nation state after First World War, invaded by Germany, loses 40% of its population who were Jews to the Holocaust, liberated by Soviet Union, displacement. You know, it's like endless. The 1989 is really when a new constitution is developed, but it's again a long process of stability because they've kind of never been on their own. And in 2015 now, as you were showing in the film, this very right-wing party comes to power, the Law and Justice Party. And we see a bit of their political propaganda also in the film and get a sense of the political climate. So in the light of what Poland has gone through, I understand this extreme sense of ethno-nationalism that a lot of citizens feel, right? So it's hard to say that this is right, this is wrong. You kind of understand what you feel. But what I found amazing, and especially in comparison to Indian situation, is that in spite of all of this and this right-wing government in power, a Jewish museum still exists. A pavilion memorial of a World War II Soviet plane was still built, and the remains of Soviet soldiers were still buried in an official ceremony. So I find this coexistence of right-wing propaganda on the one hand and very tolerant acts on the other to be very encouraging of a society. So I'd like to know your experience, how you dealt with it and how you chose to have the viewers experience that in the film.
Frankly, you know, actually, I must confess, I'm just full of envy of contexts like that. One is just because, like you said, and like we were discussing the other day, I think one just feels the lack of that kind of an approach here in our own context. Where not only is there a rewriting of history, which is done rather carelessly, but it's also, I mean, I think the whole idea that you just shove away history. History is just a boring thing that you read in textbooks, and that's how we grow up. That's how we are taught how to look at our past. I think it's a very unfortunate sort of an experience that we all go through. So in that sense, yeah, I must confess it was actually very, very exciting to work in a context which is so layered, as you said, you know, rightly said, where on the one hand, there is this extreme right-wing sort of nationalistic kind of polarization. On the other hand, there is this complete, and not just within the political spectrum, but even within the public domain. There is actually an interest in looking at what the past was like, even though the past is so painful, and the past means the war, and the past means loss, but the immediacy of it, and perhaps because of the immediacy of it, the willingness to engage with it and not shove it under the carpet. I don't know, I think, I don't know how else to explain it apart from the fact that I think the film would not have been possible if this kind of a ground didn't exist for one to think through, so yeah.
But yet on the other hand, I mean, it was also not so rosy, like all these things that you're kind of mentioning, like the Soviet cemetery in Warsaw, even this pavilion in Vyshegrád Pavilion, which holds the plane remains in Vyshegrád, the huge Jewish museum which they have in Warsaw, extremely contentious, and especially under the present regime, which is trying to kind of, put a spin on things, obviously, like any right-wing regime kind of does. I mean, but despite this kind of, this zone of, this space of contentiousness, what actually stood out very much for us was our experience of the town Vyshegrád in itself, in terms of how they had what was their kind of internalization and perspective on history. At no point did we feel that, it was bigoted. At no point did we feel that they're like, okay, let's kind of, let's not talk about the Jewish history of this, that this town has had. So for example, in the museum, you'll find there's a huge section which is devoted to Jewish history, and the museum director himself is very, very conscious about actually putting these things out, as part of the museum collection. The history teacher is very clear that he has to talk about this history to his students in school. Whether it's the German history or the Jewish history, it all needs to be spoken about, and therefore a certain perspective on it then gets created. Maybe when it happens with the school students at that young age, they're being able to see history in a very different way, which we kind of even found in our interactions, even with students as young as they were 12, 13, 14-year-olds, and so that was, again, I think for us, the whole experience of being in Vyshegrád itself. Warsaw, maybe, the whole political articulation of this kind of, what is that part? Why are we kind of, memorializing, all of that? And it was much sharper in a big city like Warsaw. But, in a town like Vyshegrád, which was kind of looking at history as just, okay, this is our lived history. What do we do with it? Let's confront it. Let's accept it. Let's talk about it. I think that was something which actually influenced us a lot when we were thinking of the narrative for this film. That experience. Yeah.
But was at any point were you kind of feeling that, like you said, it's not all rosy, but at the same time, I'm not sensing a lot of this tension that you say, and you're saying it's probably because it's a small town and it's not the capital city or the seat of power.
Yeah, I mean, it was not something that we kind of consciously wanted to kind of explore and foreground in the film, I mean, in terms of what is that, what do they think about the Russians? What do they think about the Jews? Also, I mean, given the kind of terrain that we wanted to carve out for the film, we knew that was something that we were not kind of going to explore. I mean, it's a very large thing. Also, we frankly didn't have the kind of, I don't know, I would
perspective
on it. I mean, also for us to develop that so quickly, in 6 months of being there and trying to jump to conclusions, we just wanted to kind of just hold back there, because I think we were not ready to make those kind of, maybe declarations in the film. So
but I find your choice of using that old woman who comes early on in the film and then comes quite a few times again with her dog and feeding the ducks. I saw her also as kind of a symbol of assurance, because she's so old. She's probably was a young child who lived through the world wars, but she seems quite happy with the pavilion. And what was your reading of her? Were you able to at all speak with her?
So the old woman is actually, it was very, very interesting, the whole thing, because we'd heard about her actually in our first trip, in our initial trips that we'd gone to the town. The museum people had told us about this lady who comes and who apparently prays for the souls of the pilots quite often. And and we'd see her roaming around the town. It's a very small town, 2-street town, and it was cold as hell when we were there. So we'd see this old lady roaming around with her dog around the pavilion. And somehow, I think because of language or I don't know, and we were also shooting. So we look at each other, but we'd never sort of, and we'd say hello and whatever little Polish we knew. And then she'd pass us by. And over a period of time, actually, precisely what you're saying, she just became a figure for us. She was somebody whom you would just see in town at different points in time. And like you said, she just typified a certain age, a certain experience. And there was a certain openness even in those encounters that we had with her, which were like literally like just brushing past each other. But even in a person of that age, there was a kind of, there was a kind of a connection. I don't know what else to say about her, despite us not exchanging words. And I think she, in a sense, became a distillation of the experience of what the town was.
I think you would have had to rely on this connection with a lot of people, because while listening to the film, it was so hard because I had to focus, keep on reading the subtitles. It was not a word I could understand. So I was very curious to know how you went about shooting, because did you have a parallel translation going along, or how did it?
So, for example, with this old lady and a dog, the plan was always to kind of talk to her. But every time we would kind of meet her was always one of those situations, typically, which happens while shooting, where we were either without a translator, or we had planned this thing, we would plan in advance that, okay, we'd go and meet her, try and get somebody to tell her that we'd be coming to meet her, and then it just wouldn't work out. So this just became the kind of relationship that we decided that, okay, that this is what it is, and if she's going to be there in the film, this is how it's going to be represented. And in a sense, I don't know, I mean, she also for us kind of, yes, embodies a lot of things that the film kind of contains, embodies a certain sense of humanism, embodies a certain sense
absolutely,
yeah, embodies a certain sense of history, age, somebody who's maybe seen that time when the divisions are like, I mean, the scene, maybe she's somebody who's been through the war, she really seems to be from that generation, So she became a kind of very abstract entity for us, abstract yet real. So, I mean, in our representation of her, I mean, that's really how we've kind of, it's pretty much how we kind of experience her, that's how she comes in the film, and at several points in the film.
So she definitely comes through with all of that questions of humanism in the film.
Yes.
So Amit and Ruchika, you've been working together for years now, and you keep saying your working methods are very organic. But I would like to, just maybe ask you to talk a little bit about film craft. And in case people have not watched the film right till the edit, I want to, right till the credits, I want to say that here, it says research, script, direction, Amit and Ruchika, producer, location, sound, Ruchika, editing, camera, sound design, Amit. So this is basically a whole team of 2 people who've done everything. And can you talk to us a little bit about how your working method is? How do you?
Very hard, impossible. What to say now?
Lots of fights, lots of arguments.
Lots of fights.
That we can expect. So let's talk about the rosy picture. Yeah.
Actually, it depends from project to project. It kind of, I think it's just something where, one finds oneself in. So we worked together, for example, we made some film in Nagaland in the past, where it was a very different kind of a film. And it was a very different kind of an approach that we were kind of following there, So I think besides this division of roles, in terms of camera and editing and sound design and sound recording, etc. Besides that, I think what kind of happens is that we kind of try and assess what is the situation that one is finding oneself in, what are the kind of questions that are coming out through that, So, of course, there's a lot of conversation which kind of happens between us about the ideas, a lot of things which kind of we feel convinced about at some point in time, but 2 days later, we're actually kind of like pushing those ideas away because they're actually not making sense. Like you would know, like typically that's how it kind of happens in the film process. So, I don't know. I mean, really, it's very hard to put into words. So if I'm to kind of break it down, it's like, okay, we find ourselves in a certain situation. So starting from, let's say, when we are doing research for a film. So again, so we are kind of so a lot of the times when we are working together, we're also kind of working on our own. So when we're doing research, for example, we're also kind of reading up on our own, some thoughts, some ideas are generating themselves. The things that we feel that we should talk about and discuss and thrash out, those come onto the table where we start talking about those things. Similarly, we find ourselves when we start working on a rough kind of a script, sometimes what happens, maybe one of us works on it, the other person kind of comes in and adds on to it, and then, the other person then takes it on. So I think that's how it kind of keeps happening. while shooting, well, it's just very, very clear, you know, because I mean, well, I do camera, so I do most of the shooting, and Ruchika does the sound. And if it's in some situations when we have sound recorders, there's a sound recordist. That's how we also usually kind of divide out our working method when we're shooting interviews, for example. You know, so we talk beforehand about what are the kind of questions that we're expecting to kind of ask, you know, which direction the conversation might go. So one of us is usually kind of asking the questions, usually it's Ruchika, and I'm the one who's shooting. So it kind of is dependent on the situation, you know, and of course the edit phase is when everything just kind of comes and explodes, you know, because then everything is like, you know, that's.
I really liked the edit of this film.
Yeah. So yeah, it's that phase between us is when the kind of, I mean, that we know. I mean, any edit, whether you're working alone with a director or you're editing together as co-directors, I mean, that's always a very, very complicated kind of a process, long drawn process where you're working on cuts, rejecting it, and, you know, usual edit room arguments, etc., which kind of happen, you know, of course, for the things. But yeah, and that's the only way I can kind of articulate it. I don't know, Ruchika has a different perspective.
No, I mean, I just feel it's a really good partnership and teamwork. I mean, there's so many things about the edit which I can talk about. For instance, when there is that photograph of the pilot and you hear the Chopin interlude being played, and it immediately after that, you're like just looking at his face. It's a very young person. And immediately after, you have this extreme wide top angle shot of the river and the bridge. And you just think of, was he still alive when it crashed? Did he die in the water? Did he die? You know, there's so many thoughts immediately. And it was a result of this juxtaposition of these two images and what the music did. And similarly, the sound design, there's no real music, but there is this kind of sound that keeps coming in the film. It's a very, very subtle sound design. And the other thing I want to compliment you is on the use of text, because I know how hard it is to balance text and image. So it's been, you know, even just from the choice of words to the placement of where the text came, I found it very, very seamless. I mean, if you want to add anything on that.
That's just very good to know, because we had endless fights on the text, as you can imagine. Text is the most difficult thing in
Yes.
this.
It's very difficult to arrive at the text. How many versions of text one usually works? I'm sure you're aware of it. And how many versions one has to work through before one feels one is getting the real sense of the text.
I'm going to open it up for some questions from the audience. So audience members, please type your questions into the chat box and we'll take it from there. So I have two questions now, which I'll start. DS Rao says that, it's more like a comment, I think, which says, must address the migration of a large number of Jews to Israel and the US from Visegrad and their inputs in the 1980s.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I mean, yeah, frankly, I'm really not sure what the history is of people moving from Visegrad to other places. I mean, the only kind of clue that we had, which we also kind of present in the film, is going by the number of population of Jewish people in Visegrad at the beginning of the war, and 2 years later, how many of them were taken to the Treblinka camp. So by that, I mean, just through extrapolation, we can just kind of assume that there were actually not too many Jews left behind in Visegrad at the end of the war. And honestly, I don't know where they would have gone. It's very, very hard to trace that, you know.
That's it.
There's a question from Swati Dandekar. It was wonderful to see how the children went about their research. They asked questions that those who know the history would never would. Did you get a sense that the children were trying not to talk about certain things, but things were simmering underneath?
Not really, actually. I don't know if there was anything. I mean, for one, not really, no. I think they were actually quite open. Also, I think what helped was that we were working with a very small group. We were working with 11, 12 young people, you know, so it wasn't 13, 14, yeah. So it wasn't as if one was dealing with a large set and there were lots of like contradictions and things like that emerging. Each group had kind of taken up something that they wanted to explore. The workshop was over a limited time. And within that, I think they were actually very excited. One, to be shooting, to be collecting their own material. So in that sense, I don't think there was anything that that they were sort of trying to avoid or hide. There was certain openness to it.
I mean, if anything, they were trying to avoid the plane, because frankly, for them, the plane was not a really interesting part of the history for them. You know, I mean, it was something that they found that probably there were other more interesting dimensions to that probably maybe is something that they've been thinking about for themselves, and then just realized to kind of use this workshop to talk of. Like, for example, the interview that we go and shoot with the man in the old Jewish house, for example. That was something that, I mean, I don't know anybody who would have kind of suggested that to them. Like they say, that text which comes at the beginning of their story is just this old house that we kind of keep passing it by, and we've been curious, you know, and therefore then use this process to kind of go in there and unearth whatever kind of the story it was for them, you know. So, and yes, yeah, of course, yes, you're absolutely right. They don't ask the questions that those who know history would. I mean, I think also just in terms of their conversations that they're asking, even the conversations that they're asking to the man in the old Jewish house and the director of the museum, when they go and ask him about the old, you know, parts of the history, like were the Jews actually the people who were controlling the economy, etc., etc. You know, so I think those were, I think, very, very spontaneous questions which actually could have come only from them. Could have come probably maybe. I don't know. I mean, the way, again, like we said earlier, the way they've been learning history in school, is there a way in which they would like to go and question? Yes. So I think we were also completely fascinated by the interviews that they managed to kind of collect. You know,
Swati's responded by saying that interview was brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think for us also, you know, when we saw that footage, it's, I don't know if you all felt it, but it's also interesting, no? Because you can't, you don't look at that gentleman necessarily as a villain because of the kind of stuff that he's saying. It's because of the kind of things that he's saying, oh, the Jews used to do this, they used to force the Poles to do this. Despite saying all of that, I think it's just the presence of the children, in a sense, or the fact that they could ask such blatant questions, like the way that Thomas, the kid who's there, the young boy who's questioning, the way he's asking him questions, there is something so direct about it. There's no guise to it, you know. So somehow I think that just kind of filters through the interview in a way, which I thought again was very interesting when we actually started working with the material, to see these differences, you know. There's no premeditation kind of a thing in that conversation, which is very lovely.
So they disarm people, and they don't have a sense of being judged.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's very interesting.
And don't seem to be carrying any baggage actually into that. No preconceived notions, you know, which I think is actually a lot to learn about conducting interviews, even for us. I think that was a huge, you know, it's really, I mean, it's the whole interview method and kind of executed very nicely, I thought. Yeah.
There's an interesting question from Paramita Ghosh. It says, in history, we've heard quite a bit about Russian occupation of Poland, but was wondering, is there any Polish communist who's featured in the story, so that we know the side of the story of people who wanted them there?
Well, within the scope of the film, as you've seen, there isn't. Yeah. And not that, quite frankly, anybody spoke about it either, to be very honest. Also, I think this whole Polish-Russian thing, people are very, I mean, either they're outright dismissive, it was our experience again, our very limited experience, or they are kind of very careful about it. So, which again, I think is interesting. It's like one is very measured with the whole thing. So it's not like, you know, you wouldn't say, oh, the Soviets are all bad. That is one aspect of it. It's more like, oh, this is Poland's history. And I think it is, I mean, whatever little we know of it, it is a very, very complicated history. I don't think it's easy to of course, the Soviets look a certain way. They come across a certain type of whatever, but I think it's complicated. So in that sense, I don't know if there is, at least we didn't come across anything like this in our...
I mean, what we came across actually was a lot, even when talking about the whole pre-1989 phase,
that's true.
There's actually a lot of anger. I mean, there's a lot of like, oh my God, like, you know, actually they were subjugating us. The Red Army was actually occupying, the Russian army was actually physically present on Polish soil. So there were lots of other things which were kind of happening. So I don't know, frankly, we didn't actually meet anybody who actually kind of looked back at that phase of their history with any, you know, any sense of nostalgia about, oh, that was a good thing and maybe it should come back, you know. And so, no, I'm not too sure.
There's a question from Sushma. She feels that Ruchika has not answered her side about the creative collaboration.
There isn't much to add, Sushma. No, but I think Amit said it all. But I think what for me is, as a practitioner, what is interesting to work with someone that you also know or you live with, is actually this whole idea of conversation, you know, and how conversation, which we also have with other sort of people you're co-creating with. A lot of practitioners have that. But I think because we have because we are in such close proximity of each other, I think conversation becomes a very interesting method at all times. Sometimes there's too much of it. There's just too much conversation. which is also, maybe also kind of flag it for ourselves, that sometimes too much conversation when you're working on an idea is not a good thing. So that's something that over the years, I think both of us have become sort of careful about, because otherwise what tends to happen is when you're working on something, you discuss everything ad nauseum, right? And so even before an idea is actually born, you actually kill it through conversation. So that's something I've I think both of us have kind of learned over the years. So now we're like, I think now one is much more aware in a way that one wasn't when one started working, hoping that it will add to a certain working chemistry. So I mean, you don't, for instance, initially when we began working, there's this excitement that you share everything, you talk about everything. Now it's become much more measured. I think it's also the idea that one has worked for a while and one knows that an idea needs to gestate in oneself for a while before you articulate it even to your partner, working partner. So those kind of sort of negotiations one has started to do with oneself, which wasn't the case when we started out. And I hope that will, that's for the better of the work. But yeah, more than that, it really isn't much.
It doesn't sound easy. It really doesn't. I think it's a lot of self-restraint to not be sharing your ideas with each other. Coming back to the old lady, Gautam Sonti has a question. Says, I was intrigued by the old lady. What did she feel about the museum? Did she have strong feelings about one side or the other? I think we kind of answered that, but then his question is, if you didn't want to or couldn't find out more about her, what was your reason to bring her in so often?
So I don't know, Gautam, I think it's the same thing what Amit said earlier, I mean, I think for us, it was just this idea that there is somebody her age, that sort of, I mean, I'm not trying to sound ageist here, but here is a person who's actually may have experienced, in all probability, the war, the post-war, the post-Soviet, and now this right-wing emergence in a particular way. And yet she is somebody who looks at the pavilion as a very, I mean, simply as a memory, actually, a memory that needs to be revered because people have lost their lives. In a sense, she essentializes for us what a lot of us should be feeling about things around us right now, right? So I don't know, I think that is why she became kind of a pivot emotionally also for us, that we kept coming back to. She, in a sense, became what Vishwabroad was, or how we saw it. She personified all of that. So I think that's the reason we kept coming back to her. And also, I don't know, in hindsight, I feel even if we had spoken to her or we had interviewed her, chances are that we would have not kept her speech in the film. Because, I mean, frankly, what is there to say? In a sense, when there are some things which are better left to imagine. And again, how does somebody, like, for instance, I don't know, as an aside, I look at like people my parents' generation who have seen so much in their lives, right? Even within the context of our history. And today, when we see all of this that's happening and we know what's happening around, I wonder, like, what sense do they make of all of this, right? And yet they live through it in a particular way with an openness that, frankly, I'm not even sure I have, with the way that they kind of embrace so many differences in their lives, right? So in a sense, the old woman was all of that for us. Do you
think it's a function of her age or the generation she was born in?
I think it's both, I think it's her generation, definitely. It's what all they have experienced and gone through. And look at how they look at life today, I mean, like I said, with so much openness. I think even at the cost of sounding romantic, I'd rather believe in that than not.
So I actually got this feeling about the old woman, like I said, to answer Gautam's question also. So I was not intrigued about why is this person, is it an unexplained character? I did not get that feeling. I saw her as someone who was lived all her life in that town and was supportive of the activities and accepted history the way it was. And since we keep coming back to this question of identity and nationalism, I have a question where, as Indian researchers, Indian filmmakers, did you have like a sense of baggage or even a dilemma about making a film about history and nationalism of another country? Is that something that came up? Like it would have come up for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it was there. I mean, we had certain kind of preconceived knowledge, not too much. I mean, of Poland generally, and what one has heard about it the place where World War II originated, etc., etc. So actually, when we went there, this whole idea of actually, oh, this is actually where the war began, and the war was so close. World War II was so close home, was something actually, frankly, that it's just something that we had been reading in textbooks. World War II started when Germany overran Poland on September 1st, 1939. That's a textbook version, but that's how we knew it. But actually, it started becoming more and more lived, and actually, after a while, we found ourselves actually just discarding that baggage, just starting from that place, like, where we told ourselves, like, okay, we don't know, let's just start talking to people. And then, a very different dimension of this history started opening itself out to us, So, just random conversations with people, acquaintances, friends, whom we would just meet for the first time and start talking about what we are trying to do. And, then conversations would just go back to, let's say, the history of Poland and to war, which frankly, we could have never had that knowledge reading anywhere or having read it anywhere before. It was just kind of first-hand knowledge, which was kind of there. So there was a bit of trepidation, yes, to, okay, how do we then kind of start thinking about representing something as large as this, which was probably why also the edit of this film actually took very long. Because there were points where we felt that we were kind of overreaching, just getting into the zone, which is, no, this is not sound, it's not feeling right inside. We are kind of overstepping, we are overrepresenting. So then we kind of go back to some.
How long was it, Amit? How long was the?
It was spread over, I think, almost a year and a half to 2 years, anywhere between that, in phases, of course,
in phases, yeah.
Start again, phases.
But it stays in your mind all the time.
Yeah. But it was almost a year and a half minimum, if not more. So it did take us a while to kind of process all of that later on. And also we were kind of, while we were shooting, we were aware that, okay, this is a time-bound process. We are going to be there for 3 months and 3 months in year 1, 3 months in year 2. So anything actually in terms of material that we need is pretty much something that we needed to collect while we were there. After that, it was that whole process of reflecting on that material and turning it into the narrative. That was actually a bit of that took a while. That did take a while. So because of all these questions, how are we representing? It is the history of another country. Are we representing it? I'm trying to represent, for example, the Soviet and Polish relationship, which is like a 600-year history. Like that itself, we didn't, it was a challenge. So therefore, then, it was,
Well, congratulations on what you managed to put together. And there's actually a very interesting question that's coming up, which says that this film has a feel of both a documentary and a written script. Was the script and were the actors and script involved, a ready-made script?
So I'm actually very curious. I don't know if one can have a conversation, but with Prasad, I'm very curious why he feels that there could have been actors involved or there could have been a written script. What is it that provoked this thought is what I'm curious. If I can ask a counter question. I don't know if I can.
I'll see if he replies, but I think my feeling is because it was just so seamless. The edit was so tight. And also the style, maybe the style of interviews, where it's not where you seat somebody and ask them. It was not, basically, you've not kind of, you've moved beyond your expectations of what the documentary are, or you're not following any typical tropes. And it's, I think you take it as a compliment. Yeah.
I'm immensely happy.
We'll see if Prasad has an answer.
Okay, if I can answer that a little bit. No, there were no actors involved. Okay, maybe, the one way of answering this question is just to reflect back on the process through which this material came about, through which this material was collected. So again, so this was a film for which typically, it was not like typically what a lot of us do is, we go through an entire phase of research, after which then we get into a phase of shooting. Yeah, but with this film, given the fact that we were there only for 3 months in 2016, 3 months in 2017, research and shooting was kind of happening simultaneously, which was actually kind of it was a fun process, but also a very difficult process, which also then kind of, so that was one thing. The second was, okay, there was absolutely no conception of the language that we had, so we were kind of always working with, through translators. We were working with actually interpreting, and it's also one of those situations when, for example, when you're going shooting in other places in India, you're kind of also like looking at body language and looking at the way in which people are, intonation to kind of try and understand what is being said. So here, even that luxury was kind of not there. So again, so there was a very kind of spontaneous evolution of the material through the camera. So a lot of the times, even we didn't know actually what was going to kind of come about. When a lot of the interviews were being conducted, even though with our translator, we would have had long discussions about what the content of the interview was, there was no way for us to kind of figure out while the interview was going on, what the material was. So it was actually kind of not shooting blind. I mean, I wouldn't call it shooting blind, but I'm like, okay, there was something. So, so therefore different registers through which we were actually approaching this collection of footage, which may, I don't know, it may be conveying this feel of it being either absolutely documentary or written script. I mean, I don't know how it's kind of connect it, but there was a level of spontaneity definitely which was involved, in the collection of the material. And maybe that's why it's kind of, Sandhya, when you're saying that there was a kind of seamlessness, this is why it's kind of coming out,
So he's responded and he said that, it is because of what Sandhya said, that it was very seamless and it is a compliment.
Thank you
very much.
Well, I think we've come to the end of all questions from the audience. If there's any other last burning questions, please type it in the chat box. Otherwise, I have one last question, which is that what is the feeling you wanted to leave the audience with? And based on like the few screenings that you've had, do you feel you succeeded in achieving that?
Actually, I don't know. The feeling that you're left with actually kind of comes a lot through physical screenings. Like if you're there in a physical screening. So actually, all this film has just had only virtual online screening. So actually, we don't really know. Feeling.
But just even in responses that you've got, and have you managed to communicate what you set out to do?
I think one thing that we were very, I wouldn't even say conscious of, but I think one thing that informed this work very centrally is obviously the times that we're living in, right? I mean, here in India as well. So even when 2017 or 18 or whatever, the last couple of years and currently as well. So I think the idea of, looking at our history, looking at the politicization of memory, what does that do? Are these big words even important? What is our relationship to those around us? I think those are some of the things that we hoped that the film would be able to touch upon. The uselessness of it all, actually, the world that we live in a sense, and the fact that it's actually so simple. It's actually quite simple. It's not so complicated. Was something that, shaped the work at every level. So
that was one, and also then this whole cyclicality of history, something that has happened 50 years back, kind of coming back all over again. Absolutely. And then you actually start questioning a little bit why. Why is it that, today, like, there's a certain sense of, like, whatever, this, this xenophobia, for example, like that one is kind of seen when like 70 years back, there was Holocaust, like what kind of, what is the logic that history itself is kind of following, I mean, so I think that was actually one thing which was kind of this whole kind of circle kind of repeating itself, not only in terms of what's happening in Poland or Europe, even in terms of what's kind of happening here. That, it's like almost, I don't know, the whole wheel is kind of getting reinvented all over again. And again, we're waiting to make one large set of mistakes to again know what is actually kind of going wrong, So which actually was something that was again kind of quite centrally there, I mean, at the back of our heads. That, and so, yeah.
And I think also the fact that, Sandhya, we often make, at least within our circles, we often make very correct political statements or correct political actions, right? But here is a place which is actually very nondescript. Barely people know about it. It's not even a political gesture for them. The pavilion is not even a political gesture. It's just something which is a given. It's something that happened, and yet it's not objective or cold-blooded as an action. I think that, I don't know, for me personally, there's a huge amount of significance in something like this, something that you don't make either a drama of or an argument out of, but it's just something that you accept with tremendous amount of humility and grace and love and care, which I think is a huge, I don't know. I think
it was very apparent, Amit and Ruchika. There's no way I can imagine that if we unearth something that belonged to the British time or something else, that we within 3-4 months we'd have a pavilion and it's ready for people to view it.
Yeah.
I mean, it brought to mind, the statues we used to have of Victoria and George at India Gate, and how we removed them soon after independence and set it up in Coronation Park. But then I feel like nationalism is something which it just automatically comes, right, with newly independent countries. It's a sentiment that is very important to build and put the country together, to put the nation state together. But at the same time, what we're now seeing is that the biggest nationalism also poses the biggest threat to liberalism.
Absolutely.
Because to its extreme conclusion, we're talking about ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
But I think that's what I wanted to bring about in the film, that for me, it was so reassuring to see that all of this is happening, but at the same time, you are setting up memorials and you are having these conversations. And that's what I really liked about the film, and the fact that you could give out this as a kind of global message and have conversations and discussions about this.
Oh, thank you, Sandhya. You've made our evening and more.
There's actually one more question from Prasad, and you must answer this. He said, please tell us something about the Polish culture which made you feel similar, a point of commonality with India.
Oh gosh, I feel like we are just the same, only the Poles and us, really, in so many ways.
But you feel this about every country you go, so tell us.
We both love to talk as cultures. I think Polish people also love to talk, and they're extremely, extremely articulate. And that's, I think, one thing which is kind of common.
One thing that I don't know if it's true, and maybe this is a terrible extrapolation, but one thing that one does feel is, the sense that a lot of Poles carry, which is like part resentment, part feeling that are a little inferior to the rest of Western Europe. I think it's a feeling that, I don't know, I could really relate to it, to the way a lot of Indians used to feel. I don't know if they still feel. My generation, definitely, I know. This fact that, the fact that you always sort of look at this colonial yoke in a particular way, and you always sort of part grudge it, part kind of learn to live with it, that kind of a thing. I don't know, one felt a lot of that with friends our age there, vis-a-vis like their history. In a sense, like, so I think that is one thing that one could relate to, apart from, of course,
And also, sorry to come back to Prasad's question, actually, when there are a lot of people from our age group, when we were talking about, their memories of pre-1989, actually lots of similarities, in terms of, okay, one TV channel, I mean,
closed economies.
A very closed economy, and what it kind of brings about with it, a certain, like, I don't know, until 91, let's say in India also, there was a certain way in which, whatever, I think, we had a notion of goods, so we had a notion of objects, we had a notion of things, from other places, So I think that was something which, the same thing. Oh yes, that used to be scarce. That used to be very difficult to get. Oh, that's how we used to copy music. I mean, things like that. So it was quite actually kind of seemed to be quite similar. This whole economic, social experience that that Poland had been through pre-1989, which India had also been through pre-1991. Around that kind of thing.
Also, maybe we read the same Russian books.
Yes, exactly.
A lot of Soviet literature, especially children's books and magazines, and a lot of that.
Baba Yaga.
And Nisha and all of those. So a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, on that happy note, thank you very much, Amit, Ruchika, BIC, and all the audience members who've joined us.
Thank you very much again, you guys. Everybody at Vikalp, Sandhya. Everyone. Thanks so much. Lovely evening during lockdown.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.